Hi, I'm Mark Regev, and I'm here with my co-host, the audacious Ruthie Blum, and we're here for another edition of Israel Undiplomatic.
Hi, and I'm Ruthie Blum with my co-host, the measured Mark Regev, and may I just say that his use of the word audacious pleased my father so much that I think we're just going to stick with it. Before we get started, and I tell you to please like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications, we have a little correction to make thanks to comments from our viewers.
We mistakenly, and I will take the full blame for this, there's that famous quote from an American president, speak softly but carry a big stick, and we mistakenly attributed it to Harry S. Truman, and it was not Truman. Who was it, Ruth?
Teddy Roosevelt.
And we thank our viewers, listeners, the people who follow us on this podcast for putting the historic record straight. And if we make other mistakes, please tell us. We're happy to correct ourselves. I mean, we follow the people who give us feedback very closely. We pay them serious attention unless, on the odd occasion, someone accuses us of being genocidal, Zionist, fascist, apartheid killers. But then
we laugh.
Well, we just did, didn't we?
We did.
But this week was not a laughing week, Ruthie.
No, it wasn't.
We woke up Sunday morning to hear of 6 Israeli hostages who were brutally murdered by Hamas. They were alive. Apparently, Hamas believed or saw Israeli forces in the vicinity, thought that there was a rescue operation underway, and they brutally and horrifically murdered all 6 in cold blood. And of course, it shouldn't be surprised. This is the way Hamas is, yes? But it nevertheless was a terrible moment for Israeli society. And it didn't end with that. Concurrently, we heard the news of 3 Israeli police officers who were killed on the West Bank. So we had one day and the announcements of 9 deaths. It was a difficult day for Israelis.
And one of those police officers happened to be the father of a young woman murdered on October 7th during the massacre. And this is how we're living. There are so many interconnected stories of terrorism, etc. Now, a lot of people have asked, why is it, I have to say the American Jewish community in particular was horrified by this discovery of the 6 hostages who were executed, mainly because Hirsch Goldberg Poland was among those hostages, and he became very well known in America, also because his mother had been in summer camp with lots of people I know, for example. So his name became a household name in America.
I mean, they just spoke at the Democratic Convention.
His parents just spoke at the Democratic National Convention. Anyway, so aside from the fact that he was known, just the idea that these 6 had been alive. They didn't die of starvation. And Hirsch also had his arm blown off on October 7th before he was abducted, as he was abducted into Gaza. So what this did was throw the entire country again into this tailspin of trauma, because it was reminiscent of October 7th. This was not, in other words, this wasn't just something. It wasn't just we discovered dead bodies. It wasn't just that we, failed in a rescue operation. This was Hamas deliberately, and by the way, the terrorists first, before shooting them, executing them, with several bullets apparently in each one of them, they filmed them making a little video of their last message, something like that, because they're, again, you can't expect terrorists who rape, behead, burn babies, etc., not to engage also in psychological warfare. That would be asking a little too much. But what happened as a result of that was that you had a lot of Israelis who were not part of any protest movement and not anti-Netanyahu in particular, suddenly saying, oh my God, we have to do everything to get all of the rest of the hostages out of there, including if it means, losing the war, giving in to Hamas, anything, because because the time is running out. So, I'd like you to sort of talk about that.
100% correct. On that Sunday night, it was a very difficult night for all of Israelis, and I'm at home watching the news, trying to comprehend what is going on. And I belong to a WhatsApp group of people who were many years ago together with me on a kibbutz. And one of them shows a picture of himself at a demonstration, and a second one does the same at a different demonstration, and a third one does the same. And it's like I'm the only one not out there demonstrating. And you had this wave of protests against the government saying you have to do more to get the hostages out. And once again, you're right. There's the regular protesters who are there the whole time calling for the government to fall and so forth. But there's no doubt that on Sunday night, more people came out, more regular Israelis, more middle-of-the-road Israelis who felt that this just can't go on. We can't continue, from their perspective, doing nothing and having hostages murdered like this.
Now, interestingly, when I saw that, I was just as traumatized as everybody else. It's horrifying. The whole country, at least, is unified in this. We all want the hostages back. We're all horrified by all of this. But the difference is when I saw all those protesters and screaming and all this, I said, oh, my God, they are giving Hamas a prize and a reward for doing this. And all they're doing is encouraging the next execution. Don't they see it? It's funny how you can be witnessing the same historical event and taking it to a completely opposite direction. Now, my daughter, who by no means was a protester or anti-government, she's disillusioned and all that. She happened to know one of those hostages. But she said to me, I don't understand. Why can't we? Okay, so let's just withdraw. Let's just give them what they want. And we can always go back in because, one of the myths that's being circulated is that somehow what we're saying is, or that Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, we cannot leave the Philadelphia corridor. We have to have control of it. Now, the anti-Netanyahu crowd says, oh, you mean all he cares about is that? He's willing to hold on to that at the expense of the hostages. It's just the opposite. It's not like that. There is no deal that says either the hostages or the Philadelphia corridor. There is no such deal on the table. But even my daughter was saying, well, why can't we just? That's how they preface it. Why can't we just? And then afterwards, we can just go kill them all. Afterwards, we can take care of Hamas. And I tried to explain it as best I could. And she said, well, then why isn't Netanyahu explaining it? And I said to her, but he is. How do you think I know it? He is. I read it. I write about it. And she said, well, that message isn't reaching my ears. And then, lo and behold, Monday night, the Prime Minister gave a long, detailed press conference in Hebrew, after which there were many, many serious questions by journalists, not nasty, hurling epithets at him, real serious questions, and he answered them very seriously. It was really fantastic the way he explained it. Of course, this didn't prevent the opposition here, the politicians in the opposition, from blasting him unjustly, by the way. But okay, I'm just saying one of the things that I have to agree with my daughter on is that I live with my nose in the news, but not everybody does. My daughter's busy with many other things. He hasn't been addressing the Israeli public enough. He's been giving more interviews in English than in Hebrew, and I think this was about time, and I hope he's going to keep doing it.
So I agree with you that he needs to speak more to the Israeli public. I think his press conference on Monday night was very good. I thought he was in top form. Making his case, and his opponents are making their case the whole time. So from his perspective, he has to make his case too. So the Israeli public is hearing directly from him, and it's, I think, a mistake. I agree with you. He should have done it before. The only advantage of having the rare press conference is that he had prime time, close to an hour. Yes, because he hadn't spoken for so long, it was very newsy, and he was answering serious questions. And the networks covered practically the whole press conference. In the past, like they'd cut it off after 5 minutes and move to something else, but maybe because of the day and the news and what was happening and the fact that he was speaking directly to the Israeli people. It was also interesting to see the polling. Some of it done before the terrible murder of the six, some of it done after. But the protesters in the street would, and part of, the media would have you believe that the only important thing is the hostages. And the hostages are crucially important, and we have to do everything we can to get them out. But does getting the hostages out mean that we can let Hamas win this war? And there, the Israeli public, I think we've seen polls come out that says, no, we have to get the hostages out, but we also have to finish the job with Hamas. Now, Hamas is ready for a deal, at least what they say publicly, a deal that lets them win the war, a deal that says Israel pulls out of the entire Gaza.
It's not exactly a deal then. That's the point.
And Israeli capitulate. No, but they will release hostages. Not clear if they'll release them all.
Say all.
No, I said that. Not clear that it's all. They'll release hostages, once again, not all the hostages, for a full and complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, which will allow them to reestablish their reign of terror in the Gaza Strip.
And so how they've maneuvered it, or first of all, they're not, of course, coming to the table at all, Hamas. But to the extent that we know through the grapevine what they're demanding is that we withdraw completely, they return some hostages, we don't know alive or dead some, and then we cease the war indefinitely to start negotiations about the rest of it. And at that point, we won't have control of the Philadelphia corridor. The rest of the hostages could be taken through there to Egypt and from there to Iran. We don't know.
I have to, though, I do understand those people like your daughter and like many other good people, because the hostages are very tangible. We've seen their pictures, we've seen their faces, and we know that those who are alive, and we don't know exactly how many are alive, there are approximations, yes, but it's clear that unfortunately close to 40 we know for a fact are dead. But they're very tangible, the people who are being held. And the consequences of agreeing to Hamas's demands are a bit more, they're far less tangible. It's like what can happen further down the line. Israelis could get killed in future terrorist attacks by people you've released or by guns smuggled in from Sinai and so forth, explosives. In other words, you've got this tangible thing. Can we save these people? And we should. Opposite something that's much less tangible. It's more amorphic. What are the consequences of your action? I remember,
that's a good point.
And I think this came to expression, and this is, I think, this is on Netanyahu's legacy as well, the Gilad Shalit deal, where for one soldier who was held for years by Hamas, in the end, we agreed to release literally 1,000 terrorists from Israeli jails, including Sinwar, yes. And at the time, it was very popular in Israel because this single Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, was very, very tangible. And we saved his life.
And we all wanted him home. And then it's not just that Sinwar was released as part of that deal, but in the meantime, when he was in prison, we cured him of a brain tumor. And it's just appalling. But here's the thing. It's not that, nobody was sorry that Gilad Shalit came back. But what that deal indicated was, do you realize he was in Gaza for 5 years? I don't know if people realize how close Gaza is to Israel. You're talking about where we're sitting right now. We could get in your car, drive an hour and a half, and be at Gaza, maybe 2 hours depending on traffic. The point being, he was right next door for 5 years, and we didn't know where he was in those tunnels. And that is because we ceded control. Now we can't do that again, and we're seeing what's happened.
I'd remind you, at the time of the protests to release Gilad Shalit, Israel had a prime minister, Ehud Olmert. And he once, or more than once, but I recall specifically him saying that the protests actually make it more difficult to, Olmert said, the protests make it more difficult to get a deal because the other side, Hamas in this case, and once again, no one should have illusions about Hamas. They're a bunch of hateful, extremist, terrorist butchers, yes? But if they believe that there's all this pressure on the Israeli government to cave in, why would they lessen any of their demands? Olmert said that publicly. And when those people are out there on Sunday night demonstrating, and I'm not talking about the core political people who will go to all the demonstrations because they
Even the others.
Yeah, but the other people who joined, I think there's the emotional reaction to the murder of the six, which everyone had, yes. But from a political point of view of getting a deal to release the remaining hostages, I mean, there's a serious question if the protests are actually helping or not. And you could make a serious argument.
They're helping Sinwar. Don't you? Listen, most people, sane people, when they're not talking about this kind of traumatic thing, understand that if you're buying an apartment or a car or you're selling something, any other kind of deal, that you don't encourage the other side by showing all your, showing where you're desperate, showing your Achilles heel. You don't do it. Now, it's true, we're all in an emotional state, but they are doing something that is counterproductive to I would like to say their goal, but it's all of our goals. And it's Netanyahu's goals. And it is offensive that anybody should dare say that he doesn't care about the hostages. That's
their narrative, the narrative of the hardcore anti-Netanyahu movement is, they say that Netanyahu wants to keep the war going because at the end of the war there has to be some sort of commission of inquiry, that he doesn't want to lose his right-wing political partners. He's in the pocket of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and that ultimately for him getting the hostage out is not a real goal. Now, I don't believe that for a moment, but that's the line pushed by his opponents.
And in this case, any opponent who uses that vile line under these circumstances is not an opponent. He's an enemy.
No, Hamas is the enemy.
Hamas is for sure the enemy. I was saying they're the enemy of Netanyahu's, not a rival of because to accuse somebody of that is a very serious accusation. That is, it's one thing to disagree.
They can be wrong without being.
They can say he's wrong, but they don't. Well, no, I was going to say he can be wrong without their accusing him of not caring about the slaughter of his people. So I'm sorry. Excuse me, Mark. There I will have to disagree with you. But
so I believe, it's the job of the opposition to oppose, and that's the parliamentary system. I disagree with some of the language that they've used here. And I think we've got to remember, and he admits it himself, that Netanyahu is a polarizing figure. Part of the country loves him. Part of the country hates him. There was actually something very interesting.
Wait a second. Let me just stop you right for 1 second. He's a polarizing figure because half the country loves him and half the country hates him. He's not. That's like saying he's actively a polarizing figure. No,
but
we are polarized, and that is why some of us love him and some of us hate him. And by the way, I can't stand it in any country, and especially not in this one, where it's a cult of a personality, all right? I don't like it when we say we love Netanyahu or we hate Netanyahu. These are policies. You want a party or a prime minister who best represents your policies.
But Netanyahu, in interviews, has publicly addressed this issue, and he has admitted that he knows he's a polarizing figure, and he explains it, rightly or wrongly, depending on your perspective, by saying that a politician who doesn't make decisions, is always looking for the middle ground, is always trying to be nice to everyone, will not be polarizing. But a politician who fights for what, this is his words, not mine, a politician who fights for what he believes with, even though he knows part of the public is not with him, will become polarizing. That's the way he's justified.
Okay, well, that's sort of what I was saying, which is to say, okay, he has policies, he sticks to them, and members of the public that approve of those policies are on his side, and the others aren't. But the hatred, now excuse me though, this is, I remember in all my years in Israel, which is going on, 5 decades, but...
You're not that old, are you, Ruthie?
I know, it's a mysterious...
You came here in kindergarten.
I came here when I was minus. It's mysterious, but the only other figure I remember being so hated with people accusing him of horrible things was Menachem Begin. And the reason that's amusing is these people who are protesting against Netanyahu talk about Begin with this great nostalgia. He had integrity.
He was a Democrat.
He was a true this or that. And I'm thinking, wait a second.
So Ruthie, I'm going to correct you because this is my area of expertise, or at least it's one of my pet hobbies is Israeli political history. It's true that Begin was considered by many a fascist and a rabble-rouser, yes, but you shouldn't forget, how did people look at Sharon, especially during the 1982 war?
Yes,
he was a murderer. And if you want to go back further, how did people talk about Dayan after the Yom Kippur War? And you can find examples in the past.
He wasn't the prime minister. We're just
and truth is, in parts of the right,
right.
How did they talk about Rabin during the Oslo process? In other words, this country has had very polarizing behavior in the past.
That's true. The Jewish people is polarized and has been since the Bible.
But I want to say something where I do agree with what you're saying in a way, and this is maybe too much inside baseball for some of our, some of the people who follow Israel Undiplomatic, but there was a Labour member of Knesset, a former Labour member of Knesset, a man called Eli Goldschmidt, who used to represent the kibbutz movement in the Knesset for the Labour Party in the 1990s. I think he was like 2 or 3 terms there in the Knesset. And he made a statement earlier this week. He said, one of the problems with the left is that they hate Netanyahu more than they love the hostages. Now, if that would have come from someone on the right, you would have said, okay, that's just a normal political, back and forth. But when it came from someone
in their camp.
Yes. And I think it says something. And he said a number of things. He said the left complains the whole time about Smotrich and Ben Gvir in the coalition. But the reason, according to this former Labour member of Knesset, the reason they're in the coalition is because the centre and the centre-left refused to go with Netanyahu, and they said, we hate him, we refuse to be in a coalition government with him, forcing him, right, implicitly, to go with the hard right. And I think, this sort of soul-searching is needed on all, not just on the left, it's needed on all parts of Israeli society. We have become overly polarized. If the atrocity of October, the Hamas massacre, and we've said it before on the podcast, but it needs to be said and resaid. When Hamas came across the border and killed and raped and beheaded and mutilated and burnt babies alive, they didn't ask people, are you Likud voters or are you Lapid voters? Are you secular or religious? Are you for judicial reform or are you against judicial reform? They came to kill Israelis. Not just Jews, Israelis, because they also killed Muslims, they killed Bedouin, they killed other people. They killed and took hostage Thai workers. You can't mistake a Thai worker for an Israeli, but they did that as well. And so I think that should remain a wake-up call. We can have very, very serious political arguments in Israel. We can debate everything, but we should never, and this is why I object when you use the term enemy, we should never forget who our real enemy is. And that is Hamas, and that is Hezbollah, and that is Iran. And we can disagree with our fellow countrymen, yes, our fellow Israelis. We can think they're wrong, but they're not the enemy, because their children are also in Miluim and fighting in Gaza, and they're part of our people.
Absolutely, but I don't consider, here's the thing, I don't consider the people in Israel the enemy. I consider somebody who accuses Netanyahu of, actually, we have people on the left here, all over social media and in the mainstream press saying that Netanyahu wants the hostages all dead. I'm sorry, Mark. When I hear
unacceptable.
That,
I agree. It's unacceptable.
It's not just that it's unacceptable. I can't feel unity with somebody who dares to say that. Okay, now, these are people who also attack me. They might not attack me personally. They attack everything I stand for. I was accosted on the street by old friends a few days ago who, after light banter about nothing, right away when it has started in on me because I should dare to have said that Netanyahu is conducting the war in a way that I think is good. Wow, they let me have it, but in an unfriendly way, and the things they said, not only about him, but about the coalition, and therefore about me, were vile. And so when you say, I know we really need to remember who the enemy is. That you could say during the Holocaust. You could say that again in the Bible. You read the Bible, it's like reading the newspaper. I don't know whether...
Hang on, but another piece of interesting history, and maybe this is a Jewish disease, yes? But even in the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt of 1943,
Yes.
where the Jews stood up and fought back against the Nazis very bravely, they knew they couldn't win, but they were trying to reassert
Exactly.
Jewish pride, and maybe
Yes.
a few of them could escape. Even then, as Moshe Ahrens has written very well,
Eloquently.
eloquently, that the left and the right, that the revisionists, and they had separate military organizations, and so
Exactly.
there's something problematic in our Jewish
DNA.
because even then
No
you
question
couldn't
about it.
unite under
No
one
question
commander.
about it. And also, here's the other thing. I think one of the biggest traumas that I think everyone is going through in the country right now is that we all had faith in the military. And over the past years, we all, for us, because it's a people's army and we all serve in the military, we have relatives in the military, but also our military is our pride and joy, and they're the cream of the crop. And suddenly all our generals have, what can I say? They've shifted from positions of being the bulldogs who say, we know how to win and we need victories and everything, to saying, no, we better to take the less than a win and be satisfied. And then you have this weird situation where the military and the defense establishment is saying, hold off. And the political echelon is saying, no, we're telling you don't hold off. And there is a huge conflict right now. And I think all of us, including me, on October 7th, we said, where was our military? Where were they?
So this also has historic roots in Israeli history. After the 1967 war, the military were like gods in Israel, yes?
Gods.
Every political party wanted more generals on their
That's
list,
right.
and they had this special status.
That's right.
And that was cracked after Yom Kippur. And ever since then, the military's had ups and downs, but they never returned to that sort of, a huge, high position in Israeli society. And today you are correct. There was this ceremony 2 weeks ago when the head of military intelligence moved on, and he was replaced by another general. And a lot of his
He retired.
he had to resign because of not.
He resigned 10 months after the worst massacre.
No, he announced his resignation.
He announced it, but
beforehand.
he only
Yeah, because they had to
resigned
find someone to replace him.
And yet he was treated as though it was
So that was the problem.
retiring rather than...
He gave this speech, and he said he failed because the first and most important job of military intelligence is to see an attack before it happens and give a warning in time. And obviously that didn't happen on October 7th. And I think a lot of Israelis, including myself, thought that they did this changeover ceremony, which is apparently standard operating procedure for the IDF, yes? And they gave this man a chance to speak, and it bothered a lot of Israelis. Why was a man who admits that failure, that the job of military intelligence is to give the warning in time, and they failed to do it on October 7th, why was, nevertheless, this ceremony happening?
And it's even worse than that. He failed to. The details of this story are so horrifying, it's not to go into now. It wasn't just a failure. There's such a thing as a failure. This could have been avoided.
Of course.
This was worse than a failure. This was arrogance and dismissiveness. This had many adjectives there, many nouns, to describe what that was.
But
it was, and yet he had a retirement party, and he's going to have a full, hefty pension. And anyway, it's just shocking. But again, we have others in our opposition, the generals, getting up and saying that Netanyahu is wrong.
But it's not just in the opposition. You've seen, and we spoke about this before.
Defense Minister Gallant.
Defense Minister Gallant seems to be staking out a position inside the security cabinet, inside the government, to distinguish himself from Netanyahu. And on one hand, you can say it's good. You don't want groupthink. You want people inside government to have serious discussions and serious debates.
But not subversive.
And yes. Not necessarily public either.
That's for sure. Never public. And he or his people have been leaking everything that comes out of those meetings.
Well, I don't think he's the only leaker. If he's a leaker.
No, he's not the only. But here's the thing. Everybody should know, and I think the protesters know this, but I don't think they grasp it. Sinwar not only speaks fluent Hebrew, but he speaks fluent Israeli culture. And we know that he watches all the Israeli channels and the radio channel. We know this from hostages released. Some of them saw their parents on television. Sinwar is watching everything we do. I'd like to know how he manages to have Wi-Fi and everything in those tunnels.
The Iranians have helped him with technology.
Yeah, something. But he actually is watching us, okay? And he's watching this protest, and he knows that Gallant is saying this, and he knows that the protesters are saying, give Hamas whatever it wants. This is horrifying.
Some of the members of Knesset of the Likud have called on the Prime Minister to sack the Defense Minister. I have two comments about that. Number one, to sack a Defense Minister at a time of war is not an easy thing. And number two, if you want to sack a minister for not being loyal, for not, for publicly disassociating himself from government policy, then what about Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's on repeated occasions come out against government policy on what is also a very sensitive issue, which is the whole issue of the Temple Mount. So it's a difficult question, I think, for the Prime Minister.
I agree, because as somebody who I've written twice over the last year and a half that Bibi should fire Gallant. And the first one was before the war. I said that during judicial reform. So I'm someone who really believed in it, but I will say, even I think that during wartime, now, it's not that, by the way, it's not that this hasn't happened historically. There have been defense ministers fired in the middle of war, and generals and heads of armies. That's nothing, that has happened in other countries. But it isn't a good idea. The trouble is that I think Gallant has gone to an extreme that you then wonder, okay, at which point you're surprised that he's not resigning. Okay, not that Bibi's not firing him, but why is he staying? I don't understand it at all. And if he's carving out a position, it seems to me he's trying to carve out a position in the Biden administration.
So I think with that, which was obviously facetious, you can't be serious, but with that we'll have to finish. We'll say farewell to each other and to our listeners and viewers, and we will meet again next week for another edition of Israel Undiplomatic.
And I look forward to it, Mark.
Likewise.